I'm going to provide an overview of the HSF policy, as well as the process to request HSF. And then, of course, answer any questions that you might have about this or as it intersects with Ontario Works, should you have any questions related to that. Okay. Perfect. So as part of the funding received from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to support the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative, HSF is intended to meet the provincial program objectives, which are to support those experiencing homelessness, obtain and retain housing, as well as people who are at risk of homelessness remain housed. So within the City of Toronto, the targeted group for HSF is the residents of the City of Toronto in receipt of financial assistance through Ontario Works or income support through the Ontario Disability Support Program. For Ontario Works, this would include individuals receiving temporary care assistance. Would also include folks receiving temporary care. The fund provides a valuable support for those who need to establish or retain their housing, but it is acknowledged that it may not address all the complex needs of our targeted group. So HSF is intended to support clients with the following housing circumstances. So those who are homeless or leaving an emergency shelter or the street, as well as those who are housed and relocating within the province of Ontario because one of the following circumstances. So relocating due to domestic violence, relocating due to fire or flood, to accommodate a change in family size, moving from a high rent situation to a lower rent situation, or relocating due to eviction. So just to go over some of the general criteria. So for a resident, for a person to be eligible for HSF, they must be a resident of the City of Toronto. They should be in receipt of financial assistance from Ontario Works or income support from the Ontario Disability Support Program, which we talked about. The total accommodation costs must be sustainable and within 85% of their total monthly income. All required verification must be provided by clients in order to assess the eligibility for the fund. Reimbursements will not be issued for items paid for prior to the request. Assessments for rental or energy arrears require an ongoing pay direct. And clients must not have maxed or accessed the maximum amount of funding available in the current calendar year, with the exception for funds for soft furniture, encasements, or beds related to bed bug occurrence can be issued only once in a 24-month period. In response to COVID-19, we did do an exemption on the 1 year or once a year issuance. So I'll talk about that a little bit later about the policy changes that were made in response to supporting folks during COVID-19. So items that HSF may be able to assist with includes last month's rent or moving costs. So people who are securing an address within the province of Ontario for last month's rent or moving costs. And for folks within the City of Toronto who are establishing a residence, rental arrears, energy arrears, beds and encasements, and then beds and encasements and soft furniture related to bed bugs. So to highlight some of the updates to the HSF policy since May 2020, there's been one permanent change, and that is HSF can assist clients with last month's rent and moving costs within the province of Ontario. Previously, it was for folks who lived in the Greater Toronto area, but it was recognized that we could expand it and support that. And then two temporary changes, which are ending for June 2021. Clients who've received HSF funding in 2021 can access up to the annual maximum amount based on their family size one additional time to support last month's rent, moving, establishing a residence, or rental arrears. So I'll give a very high-level brief example. So an individual who may have received HSF in January 2021, who may have left a shelter, moved into an address, may have been supported for last month's rent and establishing a residence so they could purchase household items. They may find themselves in a shelter situation in March or April, and then since that time in May found a new address. We would be able to assist them again up to the maximum amount, just to kind of help clarify what that really means. And then the other temporary change was additional HSF support can also be provided to assist clients with rental arrears who have a partial pay direct with their landlord. With all partial pay directs, we always consider on a case-by-case basis. We just really wanted to draw this out that we would still assist for a pay direct for folks, should there already be one that exists. So just to really kind of draw that out and make it very clear for folks. So for the HSF process, and for folks who want to access HSF, Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support Program clients can make a request for HSF through their assigned worker. And a part of that is, or the rationale for some of that is related to most changes in a person's accommodation also impacts their Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support Program eligibility. And so that information can be done and with that caseworker at that time, while providing us the necessary information so we can assess HSF, often without minimal contact with clients, though we will often reach out to folks to confirm their housing circumstances. So once we receive it, the HSF caseworker will review the HSF request and may contact the client to gather additional information where required. So in speaking to the point of why we don't share our slides, it is because HSF is always, it's an important area for the City of Toronto, and it's always being considered for enhancements. And so again, especially during the COVID period, we did see some changes to the policy. And so we were always wary, you know, the information on the slide is only as good as the information presented that day. And so we always direct folks to the Housing Stabilization Fund policy site, because that's where the most up-to-date information is, even as things start to change around or response to different things that are happening around us. The other thing I might offer to service providers is I can give you my direct phone number, as well as the number for the HSF unit, should you have somebody you're working with who's in receipt of Ontario Works or ODSP and is now ready to make that transition into their housing. So I'm going to give you my phone number. I recognize there are a lot of people on the line, so I'm ready. I'm open to it. My direct phone number is 416-392-3648. And again, my name is Nick Broderick. And then for the HSF unit itself, the phone number is 416-397-5550. And the HSF unit line number is also public, and so it's also there. Should you or somebody you're working wish to reach out, especially if they want to follow up on the status of an application they've made. So it's a very short presentation, and so I can take some questions if you have some, and I can probably leave you with some parting tips and tricks, should you have any for me.
Okay, so in general, what do I mean when I say eviction prevention? We describe eviction prevention as a range of strategies, services and programs designed to support housing retention. This includes rehousing households to keep individuals and households from accessing the shelter. It's an upstream solution that supports the division and supports household from entering homelessness. There are several programs that currently support eviction prevention strategies, and those are programs like HSF that Nick just discussed. There's also programs like the Rent Bank programs, and I heard someone mention it before, the LEAP program, the OESP programs, legal clinics. All those programs are services that we access to support us with eviction prevention. Now, why do we use eviction prevention strategies? So one, then the main focus is to reduce evictions, but also if you live in Toronto or work in Toronto or anywhere near, you understand the cost of housing. So we also use eviction prevention strategies to keep people in homes and preserve the affordable housing stock. And what I mean by that is there are individuals who may be living in a home for 15 years. Their rent can legally be increased by a small percentage. However, once that individual moves out of the unit, the landlord can set that rental at any cost, any price that they want to. So by employing eviction prevention strategies, we're able to preserve that affordable housing stock. It builds a better coordinated system response. So instead of a one trajectory, you go from being housed to homeless. It's employing all the resources around to support the household. We're also strengthening relationship with housing providers. We are increasing the knowledge and capacity in tenants. We do a lot of capacity building with the Residential Tenancies Act. So these are the main reasons why we employ eviction prevention strategies. Now, my program specific, just a quick overview. We have a case management model. So the support we provide is we're referral based, we're mobile in the community. All our supports are flexible and portable. We have partnerships with the landlord, the Tenant Duty Council, ODSP. We work closely with them, the Rent Bank, as well as the Landlord Tenant Board itself. It's a one-to-one case management model, and we do landlord mediation, repayment negotiation, LTB accompaniment while the LTB was open, of course, as well as service coordination and system navigation supports. We have 3 community agencies that work across the City of Toronto to provide eviction prevention supports. Currently, computer problems. And we offer really what our service is short-term intensive wraparound case management supports is how we describe it. Now, what are the primary reasons for eviction that we've found? Based on our stats, 82% of the evictions that are presented were due to non-payment of rent. There's a very smaller amount, 5% or so, that's damaging or overcrowding. There is 3% that's landlord's own use of the property, and then about 9% that we found for anything else could be lumped under their illegal acts, causing serious disturbance to other people in the unit. But the bulk of our evictions that we address are because of arrears. Now, to address the reason for arrears, it's the age-old issue of households having tenancies that they cannot afford. They cannot sustain them because the costs are high, their income are limited or fixed, is usually the main reason. There's also personal choices, prioritization, and what you may be familiar with are rent is a new concept. If you are maybe in a household where you were not responsible for the bills prior to your new housing and paying rent is something new to you, or there's a change in your finances, right? That'll also add into the reason why you cannot afford rent. Mental health is also a cause, as well as addiction issues. So what I want to talk to you about today is what are the foundations of a sustainable tenancy, right? So as we house households, families, we want to ensure that the households are covered by the RTA. And I know sometimes that may be difficult because, you know, we try to place families in housing that they can afford, but really being familiar with the Residential Tenancies Act and understanding what rights an individual have in the unit we're placing them is really the first step to ensuring that tenancy can be sustainable going forward. A lease covered under the RTA. Financial resources for continued affordability so that they do have a steady income that will continue throughout that tenancy, that their household expenses are not more than their income, you know, and the proportion of rent allocation from their resources, from their financial resources. We also want to ensure that there's access to community resources. So for example, food banks, community centers, you know, healthcare, legal services. And also sometimes we have to build in those ongoing supports. So direct payment to landlord, applying for follow-up supports that can continue to help a tenant or a household while as they've moved on from the shelter, as well as volunteer trusteeships that can support them to manage their income. And ultimately, one of the things we strive to do is really build capacity in the client so that they understand their rights, they understand their responsibilities, they understand their budget, mainly. So when I say eviction and eviction prevention strategies, I just want to highlight what I mean by that. So the chart on the screen, you'll see it moves from a healthy tenancy to the enforcement of an LTB order, which is a sheriff's notice. So a healthy tenancy meaning you're in your household, rent is paid on time, there's no issues with your tenancy at all. That can move into after a missed payment of rent, a written notice, which moves into an application with the landlord-tenant board, which moves into a hearing, which can then move into an enforcement order by the sheriff of the order received from the LTD. And at which one of these points can we really apply eviction prevention strategies? At anyone. The healthy tenancy comes from education and knowledge and understanding what your rights are. If a tenant receives a written notice, at that point, there is still an opportunity to salvage the tenancy. If there is an application to end the tenancy at the LTB, you still have an opportunity at the hearing. You can negotiate payment plans and put strategies in place at that point. Really, a tenancy is salvageable until the sheriff locks you out. So until that point, no tenant has to leave the unit. There are opportunities to save the tenancy at each one of these intervals. Ultimately, however, what we would want is to be able to maintain healthy tenancies by putting all the necessary supports in place up front. But in circumstances where that does not happen, then we want to employ some of the best practices in eviction prevention to ensure that the tenancy can be sustained. Like I said, it's not too late until the sheriff actually locks the door. So some of those best practices is upfront case management prior to the housing, availability or knowledge of the legal supports. Community legal clinics are amazing at supporting clients through their eviction, ensuring you understand the financial supports that are available to them. So the rent bank, HSF, are all available and can be applied towards arrears, and education of the RTA. I can't stress it enough, but you know, too often do we see clients that vacate their apartment, give back their key, or withhold their rent, not understanding the Residential Tenancies Act, which can put them in great difficulty afterwards. So the case management piece of the best practices is really about system navigation. So it's supporting clients to understand what's in their community, what's available to them, what are they eligible for, and how all these systems connect. Then there's the assessment and planning. So I know for my team, prior to moving anyone into a new unit, there's really an assessment of the unit itself, of the cost, of the budget, and we plan all those things. And then the advocacy and negotiation, should they go to the LTB, should they require support, the legal clinic is there if your agency doesn't allow you to do that accompaniment. You know, and the landlord, at the Landlord Tenant Board, the Toronto Duty Council are always available to support clients with their case and to help them to come up with a reasonable payment plan to be able to sustain those tenancies. Now, so the three main components of a healthy tenancy is education, 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 financial supports, as well as legal support. When we assess a household that is at risk of eviction, and we're looking at these key components, as we go along, it's really increasing capacity in the tenant. It's helping them to access any resource that's available to them. There was an earlier question about, you know, borrowing money from a friend, and unfortunately, it's not ideal, but sometimes it is what has to happen. You know, so if we've tapped into the HSF or the rent bank, we've tapped into our own savings, we've tried to negotiate a repayment plan. Sometimes there is no option, and it's, like I said, it's not ideal, but sometimes it's the only option to, you know, borrow or get a small loan from friends and family. And then to ensure that we can kind of mitigate some of this in the future or prevent it, you know, I recommend that we take advantage of the trusteeship and rent direct programs that are available. There's also housing allowances and other kind of grants and bursaries that can be applied to a tenancy to reduce the rent or increase income, again, to help with sustainability. A couple of the tools that we use, of course, is the City of Toronto resource map is a great place to find, you know, food banks, meal programs. It's really diverse and has a lot of supports for tenancies on there. Clio Connect is a resource for staff. It really gives you a quick rundown of the Landlord and Tenant Board, as well as the Residential Tenancies Act, and, you know, other tips and tricks that you might want to have in your toolkit to support your clients. I know that we are timed, and I think I'm a little bit over, so I will close it off right there and open for questions.